The sun beat down mercilessly on Primrose Howard's raw wrists as she strained against the rough ropes binding her to the weathered post in Cottonwood Springs' dusty town square. Sweat trickled down her neck, mingling with tears of fury as townsfolk walked past, some averting their eyes in shame, others staring with open curiosity at the spectacle of Judge Bernard's headstrong daughter being publicly humiliated in the summer of 1872. 3 days ought to cure that rebellious spirit, Bernard Howard had announced after Primrose had, for the third time, refused to marry wealthy cattle baron Victor Thornton, a man 30 years her senior with a reputation for burying wives. The judge had ordered her tied to the town's punishment post until she reconsidered her foolish decision. As the afternoon stretched on, Primrose's throat burned with thirst, but her resolve remained unbroken. She would rather die of exposure than consent to a marriage that amounted to a death sentence. At 20 years old, she had dreams beyond becoming another man's possession. "Madam, you look like you could use some water." Primrose blinked against the harsh sunlight to focus on the figure before her. A tall man stood in the dust, his face shadowed by a worn Stetson. He held a canteen in one gloved hand, his stance casual but watchful. "I'm not interested in pity," she managed to croak. "Good thing I'm not offering any." The stranger stepped closer, and she could now see his face tanned and weathered, but younger than she'd expected, perhaps 28 or so. His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, assessed her situation with an intelligence that made her both wary and curious. "Quinn Blackwood," he introduced himself, tipping his hat slightly. "I'd offer to shake your hand, but—" He gestured at her bonds with a hint of wry humor. Despite herself, Primrose felt her lips twitch. "Primrose Howard, I'd accept that water now, if you're still offering." He stepped forward, holding the canteen to her parched lips. As she drank gratefully, she noticed the star pinned to his vest. "You're the new marshal?" she asked when she'd had her fill. 3 weeks now." His eyes narrowed as he looked at the ropes cutting into her wrists. "Mind telling me why the daughter of the most respected judge in the territory is tied to a post in public view?" "Because I refused to marry Victor Thornton." Her voice rang with defiance despite her weakened state. Quinn's expression darkened. "Thornton? The man who's buried 3 wives already." "The very same. My father seems to think his money compensates for his character." She looked away. "I'm to stay here until I come to my senses and agree to the match." Quinn studied the knots binding her, his jaw tightening. "That's not justice. That's torture. My father believes a woman has no right to refuse a good match," she said bitterly. The marshal stepped back, his hand resting on his holstered Colt. For a long moment, he seemed to be weighing something in his mind. "Well then," he finally said, loud enough for nearby townsfolk to hear, "if you won't marry Thornton, then marry me by your choice." Primrose stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me." His blue eyes held steady on hers. "I'm offering an alternative. Marry me by your choice, and no one in this town, not even your father, can force you to marry Thornton." "You're mad," she whispered. "I don't even know you. You don't know Thornton either, except by reputation. And mine's considerably better." He leaned closer. "I'm not asking for a real marriage, Miss Howard, just a legal one, to free you from this post and from Thornton's clutches." Primrose's mind raced. Was this some elaborate trick? Yet something in the marshal's steady gaze suggested sincerity. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked, suspicion lacing her voice. "I became a lawman to protect people. Right now, you need protecting." His voice dropped lower. "And I've seen Thornton's handiwork. His last wife didn't fall down those stairs, no matter what the official report says." A shiver ran through Primrose that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. She had heard the whispers about Thornton's wives and their unfortunate accidents. "If I agree," she said slowly, "what then? I get you down from this post. We get married by Judge Wilkins, not your father. You stay at my cabin until we figure out a more permanent arrangement. When things cool down, we can quietly annul the marriage, and you'll be free to make your own choices." It was madness, complete madness to consider marrying a man she'd just met. And yet, as she looked at Quinn Blackwood's determined face, she felt something she hadn't experienced in days: hope. "Untie me, Marshal Blackwood," she said firmly, "and I'll marry you." Without hesitation, Quinn drew his knife, and cut through the ropes binding her. As her arms fell free, blood rushing painfully back into her numbed hands, he caught her before she could collapse. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd expected. "Give me a moment," Primrose said, gritting her teeth against the pins and needles sensation. When she felt steady enough, she straightened her spine and looked Quinn in the eye. "I'm ready." The news spread through Cottonwood Springs like wildfire. Marshal Blackwood had freed Judge Howard's daughter and proposed marriage on the spot. By the time they reached Judge Wilkins' home, a small crowd had gathered, curious to see how this drama would unfold. Judge Wilkins, a contemporary of her father but with more progressive views, raised his eyebrows when Quinn explained the situation. "Are you certain about this, Miss Howard?" the elderly judge asked, peering at her over his spectacles. "Marriage isn't something to enter into lightly, even under these circumstances." "I'm certain I don't want to marry Victor Thornton," she replied firmly. "And Marshal Blackwood has offered me a way out." Judge Wilkins studied them both for a long moment before nodding. "Very well. But Blackwood, you understand the judge will raise holy hell about this." "I'm counting on it," Quinn replied grimly. "It's time someone challenged his interpretation of the law." The ceremony was brief, witnessed by Judge Wilkins' wife and the housekeeper. Primrose's hand trembled slightly as Quinn slid a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's. He'd explained in a whisper. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Wilkins declared. "May God have mercy on both your souls when Howard finds out." They barely made it back to Quinn's cabin on the outskirts of town before riders were spotted heading their way. Quinn ushered Primrose inside the modest but neat home. "Stay here," he instructed, checking his pistol. "I'll handle this." "It's my father," she said, peering out the window. "And Thornton is with him." Quinn's expression hardened. "All the more reason for you to stay inside." He stepped out onto the small porch as the riders approached. Judge Howard, his face a thundercloud of rage, dismounted first, followed by Victor Thornton, a barrel-chested man with small, cruel eyes and an immaculately trimmed beard that did little to hide the jowls of self-indulgence. "Blackwood," the judge bellowed, "you've overstepped your authority for the last time. Where's my daughter?" "Mrs. Blackwood is inside," Quinn replied calmly, emphasizing her new title. "And I'm afraid I must ask you both to leave our property." "Property?" Thornton spat on the ground. "This squalid little shack? The girl was promised to me, Marshal. She'll have a proper home, servants, everything befitting her station." "Everything except a choice," Quinn countered. "And now she's made hers." Judge Howard stepped forward, his finger jabbing at Quinn's chest. "I'll have your badge for this. You've abducted my daughter." "No, he hasn't." Primrose stepped outside, ignoring Quinn's warning glance. "I chose to marry Marshal Blackwood." The ceremony was legal and binding, performed by Judge Wilkins himself. Her father's face purpled with rage. "You ungrateful, foolish girl. I raised you better than to throw yourself away on some penniless lawman." "Better a penniless lawman than a wealthy murderer," she shot back, her eyes flicking to Thornton, who had gone very still. "You'd do well to watch your accusations, Mrs. Blackwood," Thornton said softly, his voice silky with menace. "Slander is a serious matter." Quinn moved subtly, positioning himself between Primrose and the two men. "I think you gentlemen should leave now. My wife has had a trying day." "This isn't over," Judge Howard snarled. "I'll see this marriage annulled. You'll both regret this day." As they mounted and rode away, Primrose felt her knees weaken. Quinn caught her arm, steadying her. "You shouldn't have come out," he admonished gently. "I couldn't let you face them alone," she replied. "This is my battle too." He studied her face for a moment, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. "You're braver than most men I know." Inside the cabin, Primrose took stock of her new temporary home. It was simple but clean, with a main room containing a stove, table, and 2 chairs, plus a small bedroom visible through a doorway. "I'll sleep out here," Quinn said, noticing her gaze. "You take the bed." "This is your home," she protested. "I can't put you out of your bed." "You're not putting me anywhere. I'm offering." He began gathering blankets to make a pallet near the stove. "Tomorrow we'll figure out our next steps." As Primrose settled into the unfamiliar bed that night, the enormity of what she'd done washed over her. She'd defied her father, married a virtual stranger, and made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the territory. Yet despite the uncertainty of her situation, she felt freer than she had in years. The sound of Quinn moving quietly in the other room was oddly comforting. Whatever his reasons for helping her, he had kept his word so far. For tonight, that would have to be enough. Morning brought the tantalizing aroma of coffee and bacon. Primrose emerged from the bedroom to find Quinn at the stove, his back to her as he tended to a skillet. "You cook," she observed, pulling her borrowed robe tighter around her. He glanced over his shoulder, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Don't sound so surprised. A man living alone either learns to cook or starves. My father had servants for that," she admitted, sitting at the table. "I never learned. Never too late." He set a plate before her: bacon, eggs, and biscuits that looked surprisingly appetizing. "My mother taught me the basics before she passed. Said no son of hers would be helpless in a kitchen." Primrose found herself curious about this man who had so dramatically altered her life. "Where did you grow up?" "Missouri, originally. Came west after the war." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "My family had a small farm, but it was destroyed during the fighting. After that, there wasn't much to stay for." "You fought in the war?" She tried to calculate his age. "Joined up at 16. Lied about my age." His expression closed briefly. Saw enough in those 3 years to last a lifetime. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Primrose voiced the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you really help me yesterday?" Quinn set down his cup, considering her with those keen blue eyes. "When I took this job, I swore to uphold the law and protect the innocent. What your father did tying you to that post to force you into marriage, that wasn't justice. That was tyranny. But to marry me yourself," she pressed, "that goes beyond duty." He sighed. "I've been in this town 3 weeks. In that time, I've heard whispers about Thornton and his wives. Nothing that would stand up in court, but enough to convince me he's dangerous. When I saw you tied to that post, refusing him despite the consequences." He shrugged. It seemed the most expedient solution. "A marriage of convenience," she murmured. "Exactly. As I said, when things settle down, we can have it annulled quietly." Primrose nodded, trying to ignore the strange twinge of disappointment his matter-of-fact tone evoked. Of course this wasn't a real marriage. She'd be a fool to think otherwise. "So what do we do now?" she asked, changing the subject. "Now we need to get you some proper clothes and necessities. I can't have my wife wearing borrowed nightshirts." He smiled slightly. "And then we faced the town." An hour later, they rode together toward Cottonwood Springs, Primrose seated side-saddle on a borrowed mare. She wore her now wrinkled dress from the day before, the only clothing she possessed besides Quinn's oversized shirt she'd slept in. The town was already buzzing with gossip as they made their way to the general store. People stopped to stare, whispering behind their hands as the new marshal and his unexpected bride passed by. "Ignore them," Quinn murmured as he helped her dismount. "Small towns run on gossip, but they'll find something new to talk about soon enough." Mrs. Pennyworth, the shopkeeper's wife, greeted them with barely concealed curiosity as they entered the store. "Marshal Blackwood. Aunt, Mrs. Blackwood." She stumbled over the title, her eyes darting between them. "How may I help you today?" "My wife needs a complete wardrobe," Quinn stated calmly, as if their sudden marriage was the most natural thing in the world, "and various personal items for our home." While Primrose selected dresses, undergarments, and toiletries, she became aware of a growing commotion outside. Quinn noticed it too, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his holstered pistol. "Stay here," he told her, moving to the window. Through the glass, Primrose could see her father and several men, including Victor Thornton, gathered in the street. The judge was reading from an official-looking document to a growing crowd of onlookers. "What's happening?" she asked Mrs. Pennyworth. The older woman looked uncomfortable. "The judge is saying your marriage isn't legal, that you were coerced, and that the marshal abused his position." Quinn's jaw tightened. "Finish your shopping quickly," he told Primrose. "I need to address this." Before she could protest, he strode out into the street. Primrose hurriedly selected the remaining items she needed and asked Mrs. Pennyworth to have them delivered to Quinn's cabin. By the time she joined Quinn outside, a tense standoff had developed. Her father stood facing Quinn, with Thornton and several other men, including some of her father's court officials, flanking him. Warrant for your arrest, Blackwood, her father was saying. Abuse of power, kidnapping, and forcing my daughter into an illegal marriage. There was no force involved, Judge Howard. Quinn replied evenly. Your daughter willingly accepted my proposal after I found her unlawfully restrained in the town square. Unlawfully? The judge's face reddened. I am her father and legal guardian. She's 20 years old. Quinn interrupted. An adult woman with the right to make her own decisions, including who she marries. The law says, I know exactly what the law says, Quinn cut in again. I've studied it thoroughly since taking this position. Nowhere does it state that a father may publicly restrain his adult daughter to force her into an unwanted marriage. Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. Several townsfolk nodded in agreement. Judge Howard changed tactics. Victor Thornton is a respected businessman who has offered my daughter security and position. What can you offer her besides a lawman's meager salary and the constant threat of becoming a widow? Freedom to choose, Quinn answered simply, and respect for her wishes. Primrose stepped forward then, moving to stand beside Quinn. Father, this needs to stop. I've made my choice. A choice made under duress, the judge argued. You were tired, thirsty, not thinking clearly. I was thinking more clearly than I have in years, Primrose retorted. I will never marry Victor Thornton. Never. If you force me back home, I'll run away. If you lock me up, I'll escape. If you tie me to that post again, I'll endure it, but I will not yield. A hush fell over the crowd. Even her father seemed taken aback by her vehemence. Furthermore, she continued, finding strength in her own voice. If you continue to persecute Marshal Blackwood for doing his duty in protecting a citizen from cruel and unusual punishment, I will write to the territorial governor and every newspaper from here to San Francisco about how Justice Bernard Howard treats women who dare to have minds of their own. Thornton stepped forward, his face a mask of cold fury. You would embarrass your father publicly? Shame your family name. You're the one who should be ashamed, Primrose shot back. Everyone in this town knows what happened to your wives. Everyone. A tense silence fell. Thornton's hand twitched toward his gun, but Quinn's voice cut through the quiet. I wouldn't, he said softly, his own hand hovering near his holster. That would be a very poor decision, Mr. Thornton. For a moment, it seemed violence would erupt. Then Judge Howard laid a restraining hand on Thornton's arm. This isn't over, the judge said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. You've made a powerful enemy today, Blackwood. Wouldn't be the first time, Quinn replied, his expression impassive. As the crowd dispersed, Quinn gently guided Primrose back toward their horses. That was brave, he murmured. Foolhardy, but brave. Was I wrong? She asked, suddenly uncertain. I've never spoken to my father that way before. No, Quinn assured her. You were right to stand your ground. But Thornton and your father won't give up easily. We need to be prepared. Back at the cabin, they settled into an uneasy routine. Quinn taught Primrose basic cooking skills, and she surprised herself by enjoying the challenge. In turn, she organized his sparse belongings and turned the cabin into something more closely resembling a home. You don't have any photographs, she observed one evening as they sat by the fire. No family mementos? Quinn looked up from cleaning his revolver. Lost most of them during the war. The rest? He shrugged. Traveling light became a habit. You've moved around a lot? 7 towns in 5 years. His hands continued their practiced movements, oiling the gun's cylinder. Never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. Why Cottonwood Springs, then? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Needed somewhere quiet after a job went bad in Tucson. Thought this might be a good place to catch my breath. And instead you got saddled with a wife and a feud with the town judge, Primrose said ruefully. Could be worse, he replied, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. Could be boring. She laughed then, surprised at the ease she felt in his company. In the weeks since their hasty marriage, she discovered Quinn Blackwood was a man of quiet strength, unexpected kindness, and dry humor. He never pressed her for more than she was willing to give, respecting the boundaries of their unusual arrangement. Yet sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something beyond the careful politeness he usually maintained. It made her wonder if their arrangement might be affecting him in ways neither had anticipated. The next morning, Quinn left early to make his rounds, leaving Primrose to tend to household tasks. She was hanging laundry behind the cabin when the sound of approaching horses made her freeze. 3 riders appeared around the side of the cabin. With a sinking heart, she recognized Victor Thornton and 2 of his ranch hands. Mrs. Blackwood. Thornton greeted her, his tone mockingly courteous as he dismounted. Or should I say, Miss Howard, since your marriage is a sham. Primrose glanced toward the cabin where Quinn's spare revolver was stored, calculating whether she could reach it before Thornton's men intercepted her. What do you want? She asked, keeping her voice steady. Just a conversation. Thornton stepped closer, removing his gloves deliberately. Your father has withdrawn his objections to our match. He's realized that a respectable businessman is a far better prospect than a drifter with a badge. My father no longer has any say in my future, Primrose replied. And neither do you. Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. I've invested considerable time and resources in securing your hand, Primrose. I don't abandon investments easily. I'm not a piece of property, she said, anger replacing her fear. And I'd sooner die than marry you. That could be arranged, he said softly. Accidents happen so easily. Just ask my late wives. Ice flooded Primrose's veins as she realized he was openly threatening her. She backed away, but one of Thornton's men moved to block her path to the cabin. Your marshal won't be able to protect you forever, Thornton continued. Men in his profession tend to meet unfortunate ends. When that happens, you'll find yourself a widow with no protection, no family support. He spread his hands. I'll be waiting to offer you shelter. I'd rather live in a cave, she spat. Thornton's face hardened. That attitude will change when you're desperate. But for now, consider this a friendly warning. Your husband should be more careful. Cottonwood Springs can be dangerous for lawmen who don't know their place. He remounted his horse, tipping his hat mockingly. Good day, Mrs. Blackwood. Give my regards to your husband. While you can. Primrose stood rooted to the spot until the riders disappeared from view. Then she ran into the cabin, her hands shaking as she loaded Quinn's spare revolver. She wouldn't be caught defenseless again. When Quinn returned hours later, she immediately told him about Thornton's visit. He threatened you? Quinn's voice was dangerously quiet. Both of us, she clarified. He implied you would meet with an accident, and then I would have no choice but to turn to him. Quinn began checking his weapons methodically, his movements controlled but radiating tension. I've sent telegrams to some contacts about Thornton's past. If we can prove he was involved in his wife's deaths, we can end this once and for all. And if we can't, his eyes met hers, deadly serious. Then I'll have to find another way to keep you safe. That night, Primrose found sleep elusive. Every sound outside made her tense, imagining Thornton's men coming to make good on their threats. Eventually, she rose from bed and padded into the main room. Quinn was still awake, sitting by the window with his revolver nearby, watching the moonlit yard. He turned at her approach. Can't sleep? He asked softly. She shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I see Thornton's face. Quinn patted the space beside him on the bench. Sit. I'll keep watch. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the small clock on the mantel. I've been thinking, Primrose finally said. Perhaps we should leave Cottonwood Springs. Start fresh somewhere. Thornton and my father have no influence. Quinn considered this. Running won't solve the problem. Men like Thornton don't give up easily. And I've spent too much of my life running already. What do you mean? He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. After the war, I drifted. Took odd jobs, moved on when things got complicated. Marshalling is the first work that's given me purpose, a chance to make a difference. He glanced at her. I don't want to run anymore, Primrose. She nodded slowly. Then we stand and fight. We? One eyebrow rose. This started as my battle, not yours. It became mine the moment I agreed to marry you, she replied firmly. We're in this together now. Something shifted in Quinn's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight parting of his lips, as if he wanted to say more. But he merely nodded, reaching out to briefly squeeze her hand. Get some rest, he said gently. I'll keep watch tonight. The next few days passed in tense vigilance. Quinn arranged for Deputy Jenkins to patrol near their cabin when he couldn't be there himself, and he taught Primrose how to handle the revolver properly. Spread your feet a bit wider, he instructed, standing behind her as she aimed at a row of bottles he'd set up on the fence. That's it. Now breathe out slowly as you squeeze the trigger, don't pull it. The report of the gun was startlingly loud. Primrose managed not to flinch, but her shot went wide, missing the bottle by several inches. Not bad for a beginner, Quinn encouraged. Try again, but this time, keep both eyes open. His proximity was distracting the warmth of his body just behind hers, his arms bracketing her shoulders as he adjusted her stance. Primrose found herself increasingly aware of Quinn in ways that had nothing to do with their arrangement. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands, the quiet confidence he exuded. On her fifth attempt, the bottle exploded in a satisfying shower of glass. I did it, she exclaimed, turning to Quinn with a triumphant smile. You're a natural, he said, his own smile warming his usually guarded features. For a moment, they stood close, sharing the small victory, until Quinn seemed to remember himself and stepped back, clearing his throat. That's enough for today, he said, his tone becoming businesslike again. We should head back. As they walked toward the cabin, Primrose worked up her courage to ask something that had been on her mind. Quinn, when this is over, when we've dealt with Thornton, what will you do about our marriage? He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. That depends on you. As I said before, we can have it annulled whenever you wish. And if I don't wish it? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Quinn halted, studying her face intently. What are you saying, Primrose? Her cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. I'm saying, perhaps we should consider continuing our arrangement, not just as a legal convenience, but as a real marriage. For a long moment, Quinn was silent, his blue eyes searching hers. Then he stepped closer, one hand rising to gently touch her cheek. Are you certain? He asked quietly. You hardly know me. I know enough, she replied. I know you're honorable, brave, and kind. I know you risked everything to help a stranger. I know I feel safer with you than I've ever felt with anyone. She took a deep breath. And I know that what started as gratitude has become something more. Quinn's thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, his expression softening. I never expected this, he admitted. When I cut you down from that post, I only wanted to help. I didn't expect to care for you the way I do now. Primrose's heart quickened. And how is that? Instead of answering with words, Quinn lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it made her heart ache. Unlike the perfunctory peck that had sealed their hasty wedding, this kiss held promise, tenderness, and a carefully restrained passion that took her breath away. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. Does that answer your question? Before she could respond, a gunshot cracked through the air. Quinn reacted instantly, shoving Primrose down and covering her body with his own as a bullet splintered the tree beside them. Stay down, he ordered, drawing his weapon and scanning the surrounding woods. Another shot rang out, and Quinn returned fire, aiming at a flicker of movement among the trees. A cry of pain suggested he'd found his mark. Can you make it to the cabin? He asked Primrose, his voice terse. She nodded, clutching the revolver he'd been teaching her to use. On my signal, run. I'll cover you. Quinn fired twice more into the trees, then shouted, Now! Primrose sprinted toward the cabin, heart pounding. She'd almost reached the door when a burning pain seared across her upper arm. She stumbled, but kept moving, bursting through the door and taking cover behind the thick wooden wall. Quinn appeared moments later, backing into the cabin with his gun still trained on the woods. He barred the door behind him, then turned to Primrose. You're hit, he said, his face paling as he noticed the blood staining her sleeve. Just a graze, she assured him, though the wound burned fiercely. Quinn moved quickly to the window, firing off another shot before pulling the curtains closed. We need to bind that wound. As he tended to her arm, cleaning and bandaging the bullet graze with gentle efficiency, Primrose watched his face, the tense set of his jaw, the worry in his eyes. You've done this before, she observed. Too many times, he replied grimly. During the war, and after. When he finished, his fingers lingered on her skin. I'm sorry, Primrose. I've brought this danger to your door. No, she corrected him. Thornton did. And my father. Quinn moved to check the windows, keeping away from direct sight lines. I counted at least 3 shooters. They'll probably wait until dark before trying to rush the cabin. What do? We hold out until Deputy Jenkins realizes something's wrong and brings help. Quinn methodically checked their ammunition. Or we make a stand here. As darkness fell, the cabin became increasingly tense. Quinn positioned Primrose where she would have the best protection while still being able to defend herself if necessary. They extinguished the lamps to make themselves harder targets and settled in to wait. "They're trying to flush us out," Quinn murmured after another hour of silence from outside. "Or waiting for us to get careless." Primrose's wounded arm throbbed, but she kept her revolver ready. "Quinn, if something happens, nothing's going to happen," he interrupted firmly. "But if it does," she persisted, "I want you to know that I don't regret marrying you, even if it was meant to be temporary." In the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains, she saw his expression soften. "Neither do I." The sound of a branch snapping outside brought them both to attention. Quinn moved silently to the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. "Movement at the edge of the clearing," he whispered. "They're coming." The first shot shattered the window, sending glass flying. Quinn returned fire, his shots measured and deliberate. "Two down," he reported grimly. "But there are more." Bullets peppered the cabin walls, some finding their way through the windows. Primrose and Quinn kept low, returning fire when they could. Then came a sound that made Primrose's blood run cold, the whoosh of flames catching. Someone had thrown a torch onto the cabin's roof. "The back door," Quinn ordered, grabbing her uninjured arm. "Now." They crouched low, making their way toward the rear of the cabin as smoke began to filter through the ceiling. Quinn eased the back door open a crack, checking for ambushers. "Clear for now," he whispered. "When I say run, head for the trees and don't stop." "I won't leave you," Primrose protested. "We're going together," he assured her. "On three. 1, 2, 3. They burst from the cabin, racing toward the darkness of the woods. Shouts erupted behind them, followed by gunfire. Quinn pushed Primrose ahead of him, turning to return fire, covering their retreat. They'd almost reached the tree line when Quinn grunted in pain, stumbling. Primrose turned back, horrified to see blood spreading across his shirt. "Go," he gasped, struggling to regain his footing. Instead, she fired her revolver at their pursuers, buying Quinn enough time to reach the cover of the trees. Together they staggered deeper into the forest, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. "You're hit," she said, echoing his earlier words. "It's not bad," he lied, his face pale in the moonlight. They pushed on until Quinn could go no further, collapsing against a fallen log. Primrose tore strips from her petticoat to bind his wound, a bullet hole in his side that was bleeding steadily. "We need to get you to a doctor," she said, her voice tight with fear. "Not safe to move yet." Quinn managed, his breathing labored. "They'll be searching." Primrose realized with growing dread that Quinn was right. They were trapped in the woods, a wounded man and a woman with limited ammunition, being hunted by killers. And even if they reached town, there was no guarantee they'd find help rather than more enemies. "Quinn," she whispered, pressing her hand against his wound to slow the bleeding, "stay with me." His eyes, glazed with pain, found hers. "Always planned to," he murmured. Then his eyelids fluttered closed. The sound of horses approaching sent Primrose scrambling for their weapons. She positioned herself in front of Quinn's unconscious form, prepared to sell their lives dearly. "Marshal Blackwood." "Mrs. Blackwood," a voice called cautiously. "It's Deputy Jenkins and the doctor." Relief flooded through her, though she maintained her guard. "Here," she called back. "Quinn's been shot." Lanterns pierced the darkness as Jenkins and Dr. Morris made their way through the trees, followed by several armed townsmen. "Thank God," Jenkins breathed when he spotted them. "When we saw the cabin burning, we feared the worst." As the doctor knelt beside Quinn, Primrose explained what had happened. "Thornton's men," she concluded. "They tried to kill us both." Jenkins nodded grimly. "We captured 2 of them. One confessed it was Thornton who ordered the attack." The doctor looked up from examining Quinn. "The bullet passed clean through. He's lost blood, but with proper care, he should recover. We need to get him to town." They fashioned a stretcher from branches and blankets, carefully carrying Quinn through the woods to where horses waited. The journey to town seemed endless to Primrose, who rode beside the stretcher, never taking her eyes from Quinn's pale face. At the doctor's office, she refused to leave Quinn's side, holding his hand through the night as fever took hold. By morning, Exhaustion had claimed her, and she dozed in the chair beside his bed. The touch of fingers against her cheek woke her. Quinn was watching her, his blue eyes clear despite the pallor of his face. "You stayed," he murmured. "Of course I stayed." She took his hand in both of hers. "You're my husband." A weak smile touched his lips. "For convenience only, remember?" "I remember something else," she said softly. "Something about caring for each other. Something about a kiss that meant more than either of us expected." His fingers tightened around hers. "I thought I might have dreamed that part." "It was real," she assured him. "As real as the fact that Thornton has been arrested." Jenkins got a confession from one of the men. They admitted Thornton ordered the attack and that he was responsible for his previous wives' deaths. Relief washed over Quinn's features. "Then it's over." "Almost," Primrose corrected. "There's still the matter of our marriage." Quinn's expression grew guarded. "What about it?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to an intimate murmur. "I think we should make it real. Completely real." The hope that dawned in his eyes made her heart swell. "Are you certain, Primrose?" "You don't have to," she silenced him with a gentle kiss. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." 2 weeks later, Quinn was strong enough to stand before Judge Wilkins again, this time to renew their vows in a ceremony of their own choosing. Primrose wore a new dress of blue silk that matched Quinn's eyes, and he wore a new suit purchased for the occasion. "I understand you two want to recite your own vows," Judge Wilkins said, beaming at the couple who had become something of a local legend. Quinn took Primrose's hands in his gaze steady on hers. "Primrose, when I first saw you tied to that post, I admired your courage. When I offered marriage, it was to protect you. But somewhere between that moment and now, protection became devotion. Fear became love. What began as duty has become the greatest privilege of my life." His voice deepened with emotion. "I vow to stand beside you, to cherish your strength and your heart, and to love you freely for all the days of my life." Tears glistened in Primrose's eyes as she began her own vows. "Quinn, you offered me a choice when everyone else tried to take mine away. You risked everything for a stranger because it was right. You showed me what true courage and honor look like." She squeezed his hands. "What began as gratitude has blossomed into the deepest love I've ever known. I vow to stand with you through whatever comes, to be your partner in all things, and to love you with my whole heart for as long as we both shall live." Judge Wilkins pronounced them husband and wife again, but this time when Quinn kissed his bride, there was no uncertainty, no pretense, only the promise of a future built on a foundation of mutual respect and growing love. Later, at the small reception held at the town's hotel, Deputy Jenkins approached with news. "Thornton's being transferred to Tucson for trial," he informed them. "And Judge Howard has requested a leave of absence. Word is he's considering retirement after the scandal." Quinn nodded, his arm protectively around Primrose's waist. "And the marshal's position?" "The town council wants you to stay on," Jenkins replied. "They were impressed by how you handled everything. Said Cottonwood Springs needs a man like you." Quinn glanced at Primrose. "What do you think? Should we stay?" "This is your decision," she said. "I'll support whatever you choose." He studied her face for a moment, then turned back to Jenkins. "Tell the council I accept, on one condition that they understand my wife is my partner in all things. Her voice will be heard and respected in this town." Jenkins grinned. "After the way Mrs. Blackwood handled herself during the attack, I don't think anyone would dare suggest otherwise." As the deputy walked away, Quinn drew Primrose onto the small dance floor. "Are you sure you're happy staying?" he asked as they began to waltz. "We could still move on, start fresh somewhere else." Primrose rested her head against his shoulder. "I think we've both done enough running. Besides," she added, smiling up at him, "this town needs a marshal who understands justice isn't just about following rules, it's about protecting people's right to choose their own path. Even if that path leads to marrying a man they just met." Quinn teased. "Especially then," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "Sometimes the most unexpected choices lead to the greatest happiness." As they danced, Primrose reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate situation at a punishment post to finding love with a man who valued her mind and spirit as much as her heart. What had begun as an act of rescue had transformed into something neither could have anticipated, a partnership of equals bound by love, respect, and the freedom to choose each other every day. What are you thinking about? Quinn asked, noticing her contemplative expression. I was thinking that sometimes being tied to a post can lead to the greatest freedom, she replied. If the right person comes along to cut the ropes. Quinn's arms tightened around her. I'll always cut the ropes for you, Primrose. Always. 5 years later, Quinn stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Primrose played with their 3-year-old daughter, Patricia, in the garden they'd planted together. His deputy badge still shone on his vest, though he'd turned down offers to become sheriff of the county, preferring to keep his focus on Cottonwood Springs. The town had grown in the intervening years, becoming a respectable community where justice was administered fairly and the law protected all citizens equally. Judge Howard had indeed retired, moving east to live with his sister. Before leaving, he had made an uneasy peace with his daughter and son-in-law, acknowledging that his old-fashioned views had nearly cost him his only child. Victor Thornton had been convicted of murder and hung in Tucson, his crimes finally catching up with him. His ranch had been sold, the proceeds divided among the families of his victims. As for Quinn and Primrose, their unexpected marriage had blossomed into a partnership that was the envy of the territory. Primrose had opened a small school in town, teaching children that learning and questioning were virtues, not flaws. Quinn had found in her the home he'd been searching for since the war tore his life apart. Patricia toddled toward her father, her dark curls bouncing and her blue eyes so like Quinn's alight with excitement as she clutched a wildflower in her chubby hand. "Papa, look!" she exclaimed, presenting her treasure. Quinn scooped her up, settling her on his hip. "It's beautiful, just like you," he told her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Primrose joined them on the porch, slipping her arm around Quinn's waist. Her free hand rested on the gentle swell of her stomach, where their second child grew. "I was thinking," she said, "about the day we met." Quinn chuckled. "Not the most conventional beginning to a love story." "I wouldn't change a thing," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Even the post." "No, no. Because without that post, I might never have met the man brave enough to offer me a choice when everyone else was trying to take mine away." Quinn set Patricia down to explore the porch and turned to face his wife fully. "I didn't know then that in saving you, I was also saving myself." Primrose rose on tiptoe to kiss him, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "We saved each other, and we'll keep doing so every day for the rest of our lives." As the sun set over Cottonwood Springs, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Quinn Blackwood held his family close, marveling at how the most desperate day of Primrose's life had become the first day of their shared happiness. What had begun with a woman tied to a post and a cowboy's unconventional proposal had transformed into a love strong enough to weather any storm, build a family, and change a community. All because he had offered her a choice, and she had been brave enough to take it.